Welcome to Bible for Modern Minds podcast.
Today, we are getting into a pretty profound and honestly challenging set of source material. It's a detailed personal testimony, one that documents about 2 decades of a life, marked by intense control, deep rebellion, a really dramatic intervention, and then this long, nonlinear road to healing.
Yeah, and what we're studying here is so much more than just a simple conversion story. It's really a deep dive into spiritual and psychological architecture. The sources force us to look at 2 very distinct phases of recovery. There's the sudden, almost supernatural conversion that just stops a destructive spiral in its tracks.
Right.
And then there's the sustained, often really painful deliverance that's required to address the root causes of the trauma and addiction, which can take years.
That distinction is the entire mission today. That's what we want to trace. We're following the narrator's journey, spanning, roughly 20 years. We're focusing on how he moved from believing his drug use and toxic relationships were the actual problem to realizing they were just the symptoms of a much deeper wound, specifically looking at these key insights between 2019 and 2022.
And to really understand the velocity of the fall, we have to start at the foundation. We have to look at the highly structured world that came before all the rebellion.
Let's unpack that foundation. So the narrator immigrates from Honduras to the U.S. when he's only 3. They settle in Maryland. And his childhood was just enveloped by the church. His father was an elder, worship leader, a teacher, which meant church life was constant.
Constant. Friday services, Sunday services, Tuesday services, all-nighters, retreats. I mean, it was his entire social ecosystem.
And deeply, deeply sheltered. The sources detail all these rules.
Yeah, like he was only allowed to listen to specific Christian music CDs or the 91.9 radio station. Only certain carefully vetted movies. Absolutely no sleepovers. No visiting non-Christian friends' houses. It was a complete bubble of control.
What's so fascinating, though, and something we really have to look at, is that despite all this intense sheltering, he still describes his early years as a beautiful childhood.
And that's such an insightful point.
Yeah.
Because it highlights a psychological reality, doesn't it? The rules gave him safety, sure, but they also created this immense pressure. When a kid's world is that tightly controlled, there's this almost subconscious desire to know what's on the other side of the fence. The potential for rebellion is kind of directly proportional to how rigid the enclosure is.
And that enclosure started to crack around, 08, 09?
Exactly. The recession. His parents lost their home in Gaithersburg, and they had to move to Germantown. He was in 7th grade. And this displacement was the unintended catalyst. He was just suddenly pulled out of his whole world.
And this is where the exposure hits. And it was shocking. He's in a 7th grade camera lights and literacy class, and a friend shows him pornography on a phone. He described it as his first real exposure to something vile and dark and twisted. It was just a sudden, violent introduction to the world outside those 4 walls.
And that single exposure, it just created a trajectory.
Yeah.
By high school, it wasn't just images anymore. He was now surrounded by completely new culture-secular music, Wiz Khalifa, Chief Keef. He's witnessing fights, smoking, kids skipping class.
So by age 15, that little seed of curiosity had blossomed into a real desire. He wanted a taste of that other life, the sex, the drugs, the excitement.
The rebellion wasn't accidental at all. It was deliberate. The crucial tipping point happens when he's 15. He consciously refuses to go to the Friday night church service. He realized, and I'm quoting here, "I finally learned to say no to his parents." And that assertion of his own will, that was the gateway.
And that very same night, staying home for the first time, he smokes weed. He noted that the combination, getting high, having sex, seeking that external validation, it became intensely addictive for him. And the descent was rapid.
So rapid. Sophomore year, it's weed. Junior year, he's selling drugs. By senior year, counselors are warning him he's not going to graduate.
And we should probably touch on the family dynamic here.
No.
As his external life is just spiraling, his relationship with his parents becomes incredibly toxic.
Oh, yeah. He starts using these new intellectual arguments to justify his choices. He's aggressively arguing with his father that the Bible is inaccurate or flawed, basically viewing Christianity as just a set of rules meant to steal his freedom. The foundation he was raised on became his primary target.
Which accelerates us right into part 2, rock bottom. By age 18 to 20, the drug use had escalated significantly. We're talking LSD, cocaine, prescription meds, heavy drinking. But the core driver wasn't just a physical addiction. It was this profound emotional terror of being rejected.
He was constantly hopping from relationship to relationship, driven by this defensive belief that I have to leave them before they leave me.
And this fear of rejection just climaxes at his lowest point around age 20. He's living with his girlfriend. Both of them are jobless. They've been evicted. He recalls seeing the eviction notices on the door change color from green to yellow to red. They were couch hopping, facing complete destitution.
The desperation was total. I mean, the narrator confessed that he needed to be high just to do basic things, to eat, to sleep, or even just to stay awake and face the day. He was so deep in hopelessness that he had genuinely accepted he would not live past 25. And that really gives weight to the intervention that came next.
It was in this chaotic, jobless, about-to-be homeless state that the first supernatural encounter happened. They took LSD, just intending to get wasted and forget everything.
But about half an hour in, instead of colors and hallucinations, he finds his girlfriend cheating. And at the exact same time, something totally different starts happening in his own mind.
Yes, the spiritual reality just broke right through the drug experience. A profound, great fear came over him, his entire life, all his sins just flashing before his eyes, culminating in this crushing, sober realization. Every decision that I had made was my own. The verdict was immediate. He just knew he was bound for hell.
And in that moment of pure terror, the lifeline was thrown. God puts one single thought into his mind: Jesus. He realized the immense power in that name to save him, even while he was in that state. And alongside that, he felt God revealed a truth about his partner, that she was, in his words, possessed by demons and here to destroy you.
The attempt to escape sounds harrowing. It's around 4 a.m. He tries to leave. She blocks the door, mocking him. And as he gets to the exit, he audibly hears voices, people weeping and crying out, coming from the doorway. He was convinced he was standing at the gates of hell.
But he chose to walk through it, through that terror, grabbed his keys and walked out, declaring, I was spiritually asleep, but I'm awake now.
It's so important to remember what happened next, though. As soon as he's outside, he rips off these pendants he wore as skulls. The Grim Reaper throws them away, crying out to God. But then, doubt.
Precisely. The second the immediate terror subsides, doubt just floods in. He thinks, was that just the drugs? Did the acid just make me paranoid? He actually drives to a Starbucks, orders an Americano, and just waits to feel sober, convinced he acted crazy. Then he goes back and apologizes to her and stays for another month.
He tried to rationalize the whole thing away, but the real confirmation came a month later. He agrees to do it again, and within 30 minutes of taking the acid, the exact same fear of being bound for hell came back.
But this second time, he noted a distinct level of sobriety. He wasn't tripping out of control, but the conviction was undeniable. It proved to him it wasn't just a hallucination. And that was enough. He drove home immediately to get help from his family.
So he arrives at his parents' house at 5 in the morning on a Sunday, April 2019. His sister, Zuri, lets him in. He just confesses, Zuri, I think I just found Jesus. And she, being filled with faith, prophesies over him, saying, I am your best friend and I have always been here for you.
And that enabled the final, full confession. He wakes his skeptical parents, and you can understand their skepticism after all the arguments.
Totally.
And he confesses everything.
Yeah.
The lifestyle, the drug use, the dealing, the whole 9 yards.
His father was questioning it at first, but as the depth of the confession just kept unfolding, his father realized this was real spiritual work. They laid hands on him and prayed, and in that moment, God delivered him from the spirit that held him hostage to his addiction.
And we have to pause on the physical manifestation of this. It's a striking detail. While they're praying, he runs to the bathroom, feels a huge ball come out of his stomach, and hears a roar.
Yeah.
Yet there was nothing physical in the toilet, and when he looked in the mirror, he saw his true, broken state for the first time, which just confirmed his need for total surrender.
So he immediately dives headfirst into this new life. He's zealous at every service, serving everywhere, sharing his testimony. Everyone is celebrating this miracle. But a year later, the real difficulty begins. A hidden struggle with lust and pornography resurfaces, leading to this profound doubt about his own salvation.
And this is where we see that crucial distinction between conversion and deliverance. The immediate spiritual intervention, it cleared the symptoms of chemical addiction, but it did not address the root wound. He felt this immense shame. He was supposed to be the church's miracle story, yet he was still falling. He's thinking, am I supposed to be blameless by now?
That shame, and the sources really emphasize this, it became a greater weapon of the enemy than the original addiction ever was. He felt he couldn't admit he was struggling because of the performance pressure. Thankfully, though, he had this reconciled relationship with his father now. They went from arguing theology to sharing scripture, and he sought 8 months of Christian counseling.
But even the counseling didn't hit the deepest root. The core issue was still hidden, which is why the symptoms, the lust, the performance anxiety, they persisted. The ultimate deliverance finally happened at a youth retreat in October 2021. He's paralyzed by shame, sitting in his black hoodie, just terrified of being exposed as a church leader who is still struggling.
And then the guest pastor calls him out, "You in the black hoodie."
As others prayed for him, he fell, and in that moment of peace, God brought back a specific buried memory, being sexually assaulted at age 10 by an older boy in his neighborhood.
This was the ultimate breakthrough, and it offers the most critical insight for you, the learner. The narrator realized that the sins he was fighting, the lust, the drinking, the constant performing, the toxic relationships, they were just the symptoms of this unaddressed trauma. The root issue was the deep wound that manifested as this desperate need to prove his worth and his masculinity. But even after God revealed the root, there was still one last barrier. He confessed the trauma to his counselor, but for months he kept falling, unable to fully move past the shame. It took another conference, March 2022, when he's translating for that same guest preacher, for the Spirit to pose the final necessary question. But do your parents know?
Full freedom in this context required total vulnerability, total reconciliation. He went upstairs and confessed the sexual trauma to his parents. They were stunned, weeping, finally realizing the silent pain he'd carried for all those years. And in that final act of vulnerability, he realized God wanted to reconcile him fully to his family, not just halfway.
When he shared that trauma, he said the foundation was finally set. The focus finally shifted completely away from fighting symptoms, which were just coping mechanisms, to healing the underlying pain and building a new life on solid ground.
This narrative provides such a clear model for healing. You see the instantaneous intervention in 2019 that dealt with the spiritual hold of the addiction, and then you see this multi-year grinding process that required community, confession, counseling, and vulnerability to finally address the root trauma in 2022.
I think the key takeaway, especially for anyone on a similar journey of healing, is the role of shame. The narrator found that shame is the enemy's most effective tool, especially after a dramatic conversion. It keeps people silent, struggling in isolation, convinced they should be stronger than they are.
And vulnerability is the antidote. Admitting the deepest parts of your pain, confessing not just the sin but the underlying wound, that's necessary for true deliverance. He reminds us the redemption comes through Christ's blood, not through our own personal strength or our works, referencing that foundational scripture from Ephesians.
So if we connect this back to the broader picture of community and faith, the narrator felt this immense shame about struggling for years after his big miracle. It makes you ask, what responsibility do we, as a supportive community, have when we celebrate a dramatic, instantaneous conversion? How do we make sure we also create a sustained, supportive space that encourages and honors the ongoing, quiet, and often years-long process of vulnerability and healing from the root trauma that underpins so many of these destructive behaviors? That feels like the essential lesson to carry forward from this deep dive.